In case you were unaware, R. Kelly's facing new legal problems. Dave Chappelle jokes aside, he's now facing two separate federal indictments. One out of Illinois, one out of New York. And those indictments allege such great hits as racketeering, conspiracy, evidence tampering, forced labor, child pornography, sexual exploitation of a child, and violations of the Mann Act. Now, I know the first thing some of you were thinking is, what the hell is the Mann Act, and how do you get in trouble for violating it? And then number two, some of you are probably thinking, R. Kelly and the Mann Act sounds like a great name for a 1940s swing band. Well, you're not wrong.
YouTube lawyer. Be more funny!
With that being said, let's talk about what is the Mann Act? Where did it come from? What does it do? How can you violate it, and what can you be punished for? Let's talk about it.
Let me get back to the story, cause these next chapters are trapped in the
Indictment.
It's gonna be so crazy.
Hello again, everybody. Sean Martin, attorney at law. I'm an Ohio attorney who focuses on criminal defense work, and today we're going to talk about what's going on with R. Kelly's indictments. In particular, the violations of the Mann Act that he's alleged to have committed. Currently, he's facing two separate indictments, one out of the Northern District of Illinois and the other one out of the Eastern District of New York. I'm going to put both of those up on the screen so you can at least see what the citations are and the case numbers are so you can go ahead and do your own research. I will also leave a link below. For the purpose of this video, we're going to discuss the allegations that R. Kelly violated the Mann Act. Originally enacted in 1910, it was known as the White Slave Traffic Act. Yes, that's actually the name of it from back then. This act prohibited the transportation of women or girls in interstate commerce for the purposes that they engage in prostitution, debauchery, or other immoral activity. This also included the inducement, enticement, or coercion of these women into prostitution, debauchery, or other immoral activity. When you look at it on its face, this was a human trafficking law. In fact, many women who were engaged in prostitution and sex work were being trafficked and were being abused by organized crime elements. In fact, if you watch the series Boardwalk Empire, in the beginning of the show, they talk about the Mann Act frequently. That was a very common way for groups to make money, was by trafficking prostitutes and other sex workers, whether or not it was against their will, across state lines from brothel to brothel. Despite the origins of the Mann Act being very humble and attacking a very sincere problem in our society, quite a few people were caught up in it that weren't the intended target of it, but the laws were bent to apply to them. In fact, many married men were accused of violating the Mann Act. How, you may ask? Well, if a gentleman had a mistress and he took her out of state for the weekend, and his wife at home was pissed and wasn't going to take any more of his crap, what could she do? Well, she could call the police and say that her husband's engaged with a woman or a girl across state lines for the purpose of immoral activity or debauchery, which I think many women would at the time would argue that adultery and polyamory is debauched or it's an immoral activity. So men would be arrested, they'd be charged, and they'd be convicted of violating the Mann Act. And while those don't seem to be proper applications of the law, a true gross injustice under this law was for Jack Johnson, former heavyweight boxing champion of the world. Jack Johnson was black. Jack Johnson had a girlfriend, who he ended up later marrying in life, was white. Well, initially, the police and the authorities charged him of violating the Mann Act. Why? Well, she wasn't a prostitute, but interracial relationships were considered immoral. Thankfully, his girlfriend at the time was able to testify in such a way that the case fell apart and it got dismissed. That said, the authorities were upset, so they rounded up prostitutes who would claim that Johnson did engage in activities that violated the Mann Act. And while these activities don't appear to have been fabricated, they predate the enactment of the Mann Act, which leads to an ex post facto situation where his prior conduct was subsequently criminalized. Jack Johnson was convicted of violating the Mann Act and was sentenced to 1 year in prison. He did escape and abscond for a while, running around the country and running around the Western Hemisphere. Eventually, he turned himself in and did his time. That being said, there have been multiple attempts to get him removed from his conviction, have it overturned or pardoned, and hopefully that happens at some point because he truly got railroaded by the system. Now, the Mann Act today, as we know it, is governed in quite a few sections of the United States Code. The ones we're going to focus on today are the ones that R. Kelly's alleged to have violated in the indictments. Specifically, he's alleged to have violated 4 parts of the Mann Act in 3 separate statutes. First statute is Title 18 United States Code, Section 2421. The second one is Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 2422. That has Part A and Part B to it. Finally, he's being charged with violating Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 2423A. Going forward, I'm going to refer to these as simply just 18 U.S.C. 2421 or 18 U.S.C. 2422B, etc., etc. That's normally how we discuss things in the legal profession. We don't normally talk the entire thing out. As you can see, there are a bunch of changes to the Mann Act as it was initially enacted and what it is today, 110 years later. First and foremost, this law no longer just covers women or girls. It covers any individual. So women, girls, men, or boys. And I think that's fair because anybody can be trafficked. And in fact, men are trafficked and women are trafficked. The words after individual, interstate or foreign commerce, appear in all the statutes. And why is that important? Because that involves the interstate transportation. Foreign commerce means transportation in or out of the United States. So receiving people from outside the United States or sending them out is also an illegal action. Now looking at the statutes, you see that prostitution still exists as an element of the offense. But what has disappeared is debauchery or other immoral activity. Instead, for those later two, it has now been replaced with any sexual activity for which any person can be charged with a criminal offense. So what does that last part I just read actually mean? Well, a great example of this would be a woman who is in Seattle and she is kidnapped and she is taken across state lines to Chicago. While in Chicago, she is under the control of men who coerce her and force her to stay in a location. There she is abused by these men who are using her in the sex trade. While she's in Chicago, she is raped. Well, rape is a criminal offense that stems from the sexual activity, and somebody can be charged with that rape. That is how you establish that. So, for example, in states that have charges of rape, sexual assault, sexual battery, gross sexual imposition, unwanted sexual contact with a minor, statutory rape, any of these charges that could also apply against a minor, exposure to venereal diseases, exposure to HIV or AIDS, which is in fact a crime in quite a few states. In particular, for California, it used to be a felony, now it's a misdemeanor offense. There's also child endangerment. Subjecting children to situations such as this is endangering their safety, and that is a valid charge. Any number of crimes can be used to fit that situation, and that's how you get to it. Now, in addition to that, the crime doesn't have to be a state offense. It could also be a federal offense. The federal government has pushed this to the point where the possession of child pornography and the sexual exploitation of children also applies as well for an offense that would qualify under the elements of the Mann Act. So there's quite a bit you can be involved in here. You can violate a federal law regarding sex crimes and trigger the Mann Act, or you can be involved in a state crime that triggers the Mann Act. It doesn't matter. There's no preference. It doesn't affect anything. Just depends on which one is available. A final point I want to make sure you're aware of and you understand when you look at the Mann Act, it says can be charged with a criminal offense. It doesn't mean you have to be. It doesn't mean you have to be indicted. It doesn't mean you have to be currently facing charges or awaiting trial. It doesn't mean you have to be sentenced or convicted. It just means, did you engage in conduct for which you could be charged with a crime? If the answer is yes, then that's all you need to worry about. There needs to be no proof that this person admitted to it, that they actually were convicted for it, and that they're currently being sentenced for that or being punished for it. The action alone is the issue, not that it was certified criminal conduct, but does that conduct meet the elements of a crime? Now that we've talked about the elements of a Mann Act violation, let's talk about the punishments you face. Looking at these statutes, we can see there's a big difference between transporting someone as part of a Mann Act violation and being the person who is involved in the enticement or coercion or basically the luring of that person or bringing them into the situation. In fact, you can see there's a difference. Under 2421, merely transporting any individual, you could face up to 10 years in prison. And then under 18 U.S.C. 2422A, inducing, enticing, or coercing someone into this, you could face up to 20 years in prison. As with many laws, if you victimize minors, the stakes go up, and the Mann Act is no different. Under both 18 U.S.C. 2422B and 18 U.S.C. 2423A, there's no distinction. Both actions, because they involve minors, are serious, and they both have the same penalty, 10 years to life. So at this point, hopefully R. Kelly's paying attention, because now the stakes are very high and very real.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me. I'm fighting for my life.
Now we need to look at the application of these statutes, and we'll use his indictment out of the Eastern District of New York. Once again, I'm going to put it up on the screen so you know which one I'm talking about, and then we're going to focus in on part of it. So now we're going to look at the indictment itself. In fact, we're looking at Racketeering Act 7, which is part of Count 1. As you can see in parentheses, it's labeled Mann Act, so that's focusing on what laws specifically is being alleged to have been broken and who it's affecting, in this case, Jane Doe number 4. There are quite a few Jane Does, so we're just going to stick with this one part of the indictment. The indictment for this part starts off with the defendant, Robert Sylvester Kelly, committed the following acts, any one of which alone constitutes Racketeering Act 7. Part A, transportation. In or about July 2015, within the District of Connecticut, the defendant, Robert Sylvester Kelly, together with others, did knowingly and intentionally transport an individual, to wit, Jane Doe number 4, an individual whose identity is known to the grand jury. Now, her identity is private because she is a minor, but also because she's a sexual assault victim, and there are privacy rules that govern that. So the grand jury knows who she is, so it's not as though we have to worry about, did any random person make allegations against him. Continuing on, though, with the intent that such individual engage in sexual activity for which a person can be charged with a criminal offense. And then it says, to wit, violations of Connecticut General Statute Sections 53A-71A4. I'm not sure if that's the right way to cite it or say it, but that's what I'm going with. Sexual assault in the second degree, and then 53A-71A10, sexual assault in the second degree, in violation of Title 18 United States Code, Sections 2421A. So as you can see, that's the basic transportation violation part of the Mann Act, and that's how they cite it. And that's how they're applying it. And then the charge of the crime is that the person involved with Jane Doe number 4, somebody committed sexual assault against her, and would satisfy the elements under these two headings of the Connecticut statutes. Now, going on to Part B, it talks about the coercion and the enticement. Once again, it is regarding the same time frame, July 2015, within Connecticut. Once again, it's R. Kelly, together with others, did knowingly and intentionally persuade, induce, entice, and coerce an individual, to wit, Jane Doe number 4, to travel in interstate commerce to engage in sexual activity for which a person can be charged with a criminal offense. Once again, it's the exact same Connecticut statutes they cite, and this time it's in violation of 18 United States Code, Sections 2422A. So as I stated, this conduct can violate multiple things. You could transport the girl, but you also might be the person involved in getting her to go. Well, you can coerce and transport someone. Now you see Part C and D deal with the fact that Jane Doe number 4 is a minor. And once again, Part C, coercion of a minor. Just like the other times in July 2015 within Connecticut, R. Kelly did what the others knowingly and intentionally persuade, induce, entice, and coerce an individual and not attained 18 years, Jane Doe number 4, to engage in sexual activity which could lead to somebody being charged with a crime. And that's a violation of the same Connecticut statutes, with the additional sentence of using one or more facilities and means of interstate commerce in violation of 18 U.S.C. 2422B. The facilities and means of interstate commerce could be anything. I mean, the easiest ways to describe it are the most likely things: boat, plane, car, truck, bus. Any number of things could be used and were likely used. This girl was trafficked, as we talked about before, which is the very common thing happens here. Then finally, transportation of minors. It's Part D. Once again, in July of 2015, within the District of Connecticut, R. Kelly, along with others, did knowingly transport an individual who had not attained 18 years of age. Jane Doe number 4, to engage in interstate commerce with the intent that sexual activity for which a criminal offense can be charged, and its violations of Connecticut statutes 53A 71A4 and 53A 71A10. The exact same ones we see in the past 3 paragraphs. Once again, it's sexual assault in the second degree, and this time it's a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2423A. And for those of you guys who remember, Section C and D cover minors, and when you do the Mann Act involving minors, you face 10 years to life in prison. So Part C and D are very dangerous for R. Kelly, and hopefully he's doing things the right way and following his attorney's advice, because getting convicted of those 2 counts alone would never see the light of day again. There are other parts to this indictment. This is merely just what I thought was important to look at, and I think this illustrates the Mann Act, how it's applied, how a prosecutor puts the facts together, and how they produce and present an argument laying out their case. There are other parts to this indictment. We'll cover them at a later time. You can read through the rest of it, and certainly any other parts of the Mann Act you see. This is a great example of how they do it. As you can see, the U.S. Attorney in this case laid out a very succinct and clear fact pattern that establishes these Mann Act violations that are alleged to have occurred. Does this mean R. Kelly's automatically going to get convicted? No. Does this mean he did it? No. In fact, he's presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So as of right now, he's innocent. Does that mean what'll happen down the road? He'll be innocent? I don't know. It may change, it may not. I would just point out that R. Kelly has won prior criminal cases. In fact, he won a felony trial where he was charged with 14 counts of possessing child pornography from the Illinois State's Attorney's Office, and he was acquitted of all charges. So this is not something new to him, and this is not something that's impossible given his prior track record. Certainly, we'll be able to look into this further once we see more discovery gets released, there's more filings by both sides. We'll have an idea of what's going on and really what we're looking at. But as of right now, things don't look good for him, and they're very bad. That doesn't mean he can't get through this. Once again, guys, if you like what you see here, like, share, subscribe. All those things help me out. Comment or questions below. And until next time, just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty.
Robert. 30 years of my career. Y'all trying to kill me. You killing me, man. This is not about music.